Hey there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we help parents understand their kids and we teach little kids to talk. Today, we are going to jump to the opposite end of the parenting spectrum here and talk to Beth Felsen, who from Spectrum Transition Coaching. Beth, tell me, I did not ask you this. What do you call yourself?
I am a success coach.
Oh, I love it. Okay. And you are a success coach who works in at least one capacity, well, mostly with, tell us about who you work with.
So I work with the community of autistic young adults and their parents.
Okay. And one of the ways you do that is through your college readiness program, yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So walk us through why do parents and kids need a college readiness program?
So college is a huge transition for even neurotypical young adults and their parents. I mean, it's, everybody's transitioning to just a different way of being. Mm-hmm. For autistic young adults and their families, it can be an even bigger transition. And that's really for two reasons. One is that for young adults on the spectrum who have a formal diagnosis and have had supports in K through 12 and have been doing all kinds of interventions, there's a lot of parental involvement there and a lot of tremendous scaffolding. Scaffolding is one of my favorite words. Okay,
mine too.
It's there for a reason, right? It's there to help the student succeed. But what happens is that intense involvement can make the transition more difficult.
Yeah.
The other side of things, the other reason why the transition can be more difficult is that there are skill sets that are not used with great frequency in high school that become very important in college. And that can be also very challenging for autistic young adults. One of those spheres is social communication.
Yeah.
And another one of those spheres is self-advocacy. Mm. And so those are, among other things, but those are really the two big ones. And what I have found is that families don't know what they don't know. And without having their horizons broadened about these things, the young adults are not always really in a good place when they get to college. Yeah. And what sometimes happens then is they're not successful and they wind up leaving college for a period of time.
They wind up in the basement.
Exactly. And that's a really, really deep hole to dig out of. And so with the college readiness work, my goal is to not have your kids in your basement after their first semester of college.
Yeah. So what's interesting, I want to go back to this idea of scaffolding because many of the families that I see have very young children. And then in our Raising Orchid Kids program, we have kids who are, teenagers, early teens. Right. The scaffolding is super important particularly in the early years, also in the later years. And to your point, the scaffolding can also mask the degree to which a student is dependent on those supports. And so when we talk about we never want to make scaffolding a bad thing.
Right.
And we also want to acknowledge how much support a student is getting so that we're not surprised. And this is what I hear you saying, so that we're not surprised when they go somewhere where either that we don't know that those supports have to be in place,
right,
or that those supports can't be in place. And now we're stuck in sort of out in the wind, and right. We wonder why somebody's bombing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when families come to you, what are they thinking about? What's a common question that they ask you when they come to you?
Probably the most common question is, will my child's IEP move with them to college?
Does a child's IEP move with them to college?
No, it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is that the laws are totally different. So, again, this is like in the realm of we don't know what we don't know. The IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is the law that governs K through 12 education, and the IEP process and everything, and 504 plans as well. Let's stick a pin in 504 plans, but IEPs at least, that's the deal with IDEA. When an individual leaves high school, leaves K through 12, and goes to higher education, the Americans with Disabilities Act is the law that pertains there.
Okay.
So the biggest difference is that with K through 12, the goal is that every single student, regardless of disability, has equal access and opportunity and can be equally as successful. And the school is required by law to provide everything and anything that the child needs to be successful. If you have a nonverbal student who wants to take an AP class, you need to find the mechanisms that can allow that student to participate fully in the AP class. Okay. Then when you get to college and you're dealing with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the metric changes. So it's you need to get into college on your own merits, which is why the IEPs can be important, and things like extra time on, the standardized tests that kids take and things like that.
Yeah.
But there it's all about creating equal access. So what that means, and with reasonable accommodations, that's a very key term. Okay, so there's a very big difference between and it's up to the school and sometimes the professor to decide what a reasonable accommodation is.
Wow.
So yeah. So and they're not allowed to fundamentally change the curriculum for an individual with a disability. So if you can't meet all the requirements of a particular course using what the school considers to be reasonable accommodations, you can't take that course.
Right. Yeah.
So it's highly individualized, and it's just a completely different metric. So families aren't really prepared for that transition. And it's a very eye-opening to hear, oh, my child's IEP will not transfer over.
Yeah. The other thing I think that confounds things and guide me on this is, once kids go to college, the college is not dealing with parents.
That's correct as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even talk about that one.
Yeah.
That's why self-advocacy is so important,
because
not only is the Americans with Disabilities Act the law of the land in higher education, but you have the HIPAA laws and all the privacy safeguards.
Yeah.
So once a child turns 18, parents can't, without special permission and written permission from their child, cannot directly call, the head of academic services at the college and say, what's going on? My child's, whatever.
And we can argue about, and we probably should argue about, whether that's appropriate and do certain diagnoses merit, blah, blah, blah. But what you're describing is this is kind of the way that the law is written. This is the way that the policies get enacted. And this is what parents come up against. Okay, for anybody who's watching, who's got very young children, I want you to take a deep breath right now. Okay, lots of things are going to change in your world before you get to a place where you've got to make these kinds of decisions. The point here is to just kind of cast a net and take a quick peek, but not to stay up nights worrying about this. So I just wanted a little PSA there. But having said that, I think that before we get to that kind of chasm and we're looking over the cliff being like, oh crap, what's going on here? There are some things, and we talk about them in our Raising Orchid Kids class. I certainly walk parents through it in the speech therapy practice when kids come to speech therapy. There are some things that we can do as as therapists, as parents, as coaches, as teachers, to prepare our neurodivergent students for independence.
Absolutely.
And so what's your take on, like, and we can go big or we can go small, like, what's your take on fostering independence in children generally?
It is never, your child is never too young to start building some independent skills. When you help your child,
Or too impaired.
correct, yes. When you help your child to build independence, you're also helping to change your own mindset about what your child can do independently. And my favorite way to involve kids in building independence skills and also in reducing the parental load a little bit is laundry. Okay, so there are so many different ways. I mean, from the youngest of ages, you can have your kids, and regardless of disability, you can have your kids help you sort laundry. You can bring them to the washing machine with you and have them help you put clothing into the washing machine. And the whole time, I mean, there's so many different skills you can build with that. Language skills as well, right? Because the whole time you can walk them through, what you're doing and what you're, are you a person who separates colors and whites? And then as they get older, you can have them help you with that. And so you're taking these little baby steps to ultimately get to the point where you can have your kids start doing their own laundry.
Yeah. And here's what doesn't happen when we don't start by sorting the laundry, or at least allowing our child to come with us when we are sorting the laundry, or push the buttons, or knowing when the laundry happens. And laundry, again, stand in for many other household chores. Yeah.
Right.
Taking out the trash, all of that thing. One of the things I love to have parents do is a 1-year-old can take their non-breakable plate from the table to the kitchen.
Absolutely.
They can do that.
Absolutely.
They might spill along the way. That's okay. But if we don't set that stuff up systematically in bite-sized chunks, then number one, we get arguments with 12-year-olds about whether they should or shouldn't be able or have to do their laundry. That's the first thing, right? So then we get some back talk and then we get annoyed about that. The other thing we get is they don't know how to do it. And then we get mad at them for not knowing how to do it when we have not prepared them.
Absolutely. And the other thing that happens is, you do get to that point when you're dealing with young teens where they want independence. And, I remember with my own kids, my kids all did chorus in high school. And so from a very early age, my kids were sorting their own laundry, folding their own laundry, putting their own clean laundry away. But the thing that I didn't do the last step was having them actually from start to finish do all their own laundry, including the washing machine. And I remember butting heads with my youngest about the fact that he needed his chorus t-shirt on Friday and the chorus t-shirt was dirty, and having real arguments with him about, well, you didn't tell me that you needed it. And so what you don't want to happen is you don't want to make it a punishment to have that independence, right? You don't want to say, you know what, do your own laundry. I'm tired of this. So by incrementally increasing their level of responsibility, then you can avoid, getting to the point where you're butting heads with your kids over those kinds of things. And it becomes more of a punishment than an independent skill.
Yeah.
And once they're doing all their own stuff, I mean, they get very proud when they're doing it on their own.
Yep.
And it changes the dynamic of the parent-child relationship when you know that your child can be responsible about certain things, and that they're also responsible for the consequences of not doing what they needed to do. And that's a very, very important lesson for young adults, kids to learn before they get to college.
Let's talk about consequences for a second.
Mm-hmm.
A consequence, because I don't think it means what people think it means. You know that part in The Princess Bride when he's like, boss,
Yeah.
I don't think that means what you think it means. Taking away someone's phone for not doing their laundry is not a consequence.
That's a punishment.
It's a punishment, number one,
Right.
and is not a punishment that suits the crime.
Right.
And so the consequence, I love your example of the shirt that's in the laundry, because the consequence of the fact that somebody forgot that he needed a shirt and didn't tell you or didn't do his own laundry is that his shirt is dirty.
Exactly.
And that's enough.
Absolutely.
And so it's funny because we spend a lot of time in Raising Orchid Kids talking about natural and logical consequences, right? And so that the ones that are so nice are those baked in ones where you're like, yeah, I guess your shirt is dirty. And we don't have to be upset about it because they're upset enough.
Absolutely. And it's also not our fault.
Right. Well, what do you say? But this is interesting because what do you say to parents? And I'm sure this happens where you've got parents who are, and understandably so, very wrapped up in the success or failure of their child because their child has a diagnosis or has had difficulty with things in the past. And there comes this time, and all of parenting is a journey toward hopefully a more equal relationship, a relationship among equals. Mm-hmm. Which is for sure confounded when we've got a diagnosis, but also there's tension there. How do you navigate that with families?
So there's a couple of things there, I think. First of all, obviously you have to know your own child and what their capabilities are. And if your child is not able physically to bend down and pick up the laundry and put it in the washing machine, you need to figure out a way around that. So and if your child is, you may need to have a longer period of reminders with your child, to get to the point where they're 100% completely independent with something like laundry.
Well, and when you started to say that, I was like, yeah, but where are they independent? Well, they're not dependent. They're not independent at all because I have to remind them because they forget constantly because their ADHD doesn't allow them, or their autism, doesn't allow them to remember. What do you?
Right. So that's when we talk about tools to help. So the phrase I use, I just had a session with a client before this, and this is something I say often. When the client says to me that they were not successful in doing X, Y, or Z, I say, well, what got in the way? What got in the way of you being successful? So if you have a child who has a physical disability that makes it difficult for them to do a piece of a task, then you have to figure out a way to make it possible for them to do that. And I think oftentimes with a little bit of creative thinking, or maybe no creative thinking, there are some easy solutions. Like, if you can't bend down, I have parents who are getting older and it's kind of the same thing. The grabber has become our, that thing has become our best friend in some chores. Yeah. But then there's also, the ADHD and the neurodivergent pieces of brain functioning that can get in the way of success. Yeah. So then we talk about things like visual reminders, or, if your child has a smartphone, setting reminders with alarms. Things like that. And those are the kinds of tools that once you figure it definitely takes trial and error. But once you figure out the tools that work, then you can use those tools for other tasks. I know that a visual reminder, a note, a sticky note on my wallet reminds me to do things. So I use that for a lot of different things. So that's what I say to those parents is that you have to figure out what's getting in the way of success, and then brainstorm ways that you can tear down that barrier.
Yeah. And you really have to be willing, and this is It's so hard when our kids are, number one, when kids are struggling. Number two, when kids are not meeting developmental milestones. And, again, for my people, are they, a lot of late talkers, a lot of sort of preschoolers who aren't using language in the complexity and the length that we want. But
Right.
we're even talking about, and actually a parent said this to me recently, we forget that developmental milestones apply to kids after age 5 also.
Yes,
We
they do.
completely forget that. And so number one, remembering that. Number two, using those developmental milestones as information, not as punishment for ourselves or our children. Right? Because when we see the gap, then the trick becomes, okay, how are we bridging this gap? What can we do to get closer to where a child is? What can we teach child to get closer to where developmental milestone is? And how does that process look? But if we shut it down from they just can't, then we've gone nowhere.
Right. And with autism, one of the things that happens sometimes is we make assumptions that something that's implied in something that we say to our children is understood in the way we expect it to be understood. So to go back to the laundry example, put your clothes in the washing machine. It might be obvious to us. It's almost like, remember the Amelia Bedelia books? Okay, so some of it's a little bit like that. If I say put your clothes in the washing machine, I might feel that my child should understand that means put them in the washing machine, put the detergent in, and start the wash. But that may not be what my child hears. My child may put their clothes in the washing machine, come back an hour later, and be absolutely floored that the clothes are not soaking wet and clean. So instead of getting angry or frustrated, it's not really anger, it's really more frustration. But, you may need a visual checklist of everything that it entails to do a load of laundry. We have a checklist like that in our laundry room from when my kids were little, and and my husband also doesn't always know how to use the washing machine 100%.
It works for spouses too.
Exactly. So we have a list, and with every single step spelled out. And if you have a child who doesn't read, then you can use pictures. You can use a PEC system to do the same kind of a thing. And if they miss steps, if there's some kind of a processing thing going on there, have a dry erase marker so they can actually check off the thing after they do it, and they know that they have to look, and everything needs to be checked off.
There's so many strategies. I think the thing I want to people who are watching this, if you're stuck, reach out to somebody whose job this is, because Beth and I could sit here and list 25 strategies that people can use in these situations, and you don't have to bang your head against the wall. Right?
Absolutely.
Of course, the internet also is fantastic for these kinds of things. A client of mine recently actually got on Etsy a chore board, and it comes with, it's like a sensory friendly thing. I'll have to get the name and post it somewhere, but it comes with a click tab that you can indicate whether it's finished.
Fun.
And so it's got all the things, it's got good visuals, it's got good sensory, it's durable, so that when you throw it at your mom or dad, it doesn't break. There are so many strategies. And so rather than I think the question is not why can't he do it? It's how could he do it? Right? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, the other piece that we haven't mentioned is that parental sort of anxiety and frustration that comes along with having your child do something new for the first time. I mean, hopefully you've built up to it. And so the very last step is just a tiny little piece in the process. But, for those of us who have kids who are a little bit older, when your child learns to drive and the first time they go out on their own without a parent, it's like, but, that's doing these things, teaching your children to be independent from a young age helps parents learn how to deal with those feelings as well. because that's something that gets in the way when kids go to college.
Yeah.
Talk about getting in the way of success. It becomes a big thing. And because parents aren't able to call up the registrar and find out why their child didn't get that class that they were hoping to get,
Right.
we need practice as parents in how to deal with those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's funny. I often say, like, again, to this point of, our entire parenting journey is so that we can get to an adult relationship with our child. They're going to live in our house for 18 years out of what's probably 100-year life.
Mm-hmm.
That is 1/5. 1/5. And
Yep.
so if, it feels so endless when they're toddlers, and even, it feels like it's going to last forever when they're in elementary school, and then high school hits and all of a sudden you're done. And again, to anybody who's going through those endless times, respect. And if we're not preparing ourselves and them,
Mm-hmm.
and when we have kids who have developmental, diagnoses or issues going on, we have to be even more prepared to fade ourselves, to teach them the skills, to be really systematic about it.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
if people want to find you, how do they do that?
So the very best way to find me is to go to my website, which is spectrumtransitioncoaching.com. I also have a Facebook page for the business. So you can go onto Facebook and look for Spectrum Transition Coaching. Those are the easiest ways to find me. And in both cases, if you want to connect with me individually, there are ways to do that through my website and my Facebook page.
Perfect. So we will link to your website on our website, wherever you're watching this. And Beth, it was such a pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you. So
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Have a good one.